it's Thor, and we were just live, and I think Mercury retrograde struck because my Zoom call ended up, or the Zoom meeting ended up closing down, so I had to restart the whole thing. So thank you guys for being so patient. Today we're going to be talking about Pope Francis. And the reason why we're focusing on Pope Francis is recently I've been reading some articles in the mainstream media talking about that he's, not really in good health. And he's even been discussing, and I saw this in some mainstream articles, that he may resign or he may step down in some sort of capacity. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at Pope Francis' chart and see if we can really, if we can see that in the chart. But also, in different metaphysical communities, everything that's going on is seen as like this giant sea change, with Pluto being in the sign of Capricorn. There's this idea of like, there's this massive change of leadership around the globe that's happening at the moment. So, the Queen passed away recently, and, the reins have went to King Charles. And now, we're looking at the Vatican. Could, the Pope step down, and could somebody else be basically taking over the reins of the Vatican? So that's really what we're going to be looking at today. So it's part of this giant awakening, or this giant energetic sea change we see happening, where we're noticing so many changes of leadership around the world. So we're going to see what we can get from the chart with that. As always, those of you guys that are new to the channel, please, and hold on a moment. Those of you guys that are new, please like and subscribe. Seems like Mercury retrograde striking with me clicking on the computer. Those of you guys that are new, please like and subscribe. I'm really happy with the followers and the subscribers we've been getting. It's really, I'm really appreciative of all of you guys and your support. And thank you guys, those of you guys that have been getting readings that help support the channel and what I do with teaching Vedic astrology, and also teaching dharmic ways of living and how to live your life in a dharmic way. My goal is 10,000 subscribers, so we're hoping to get there. And then if you guys are interested in a reading, check down below, and plenty of details down below. So let's go into Pope Francis's chart. Okay, so we're going to take a look at that. I'm going to pull up the chart first instead of going to the slide here. So this is Pope Francis's chart. And the first thing we're going to notice in the chart of Pope Francis, we're going to talk a little bit about a few things we noticed in the chart. And then we'll go into the specific period that Pope Francis is in. And those of you guys that are curious about a date, I'm going to give a date of October 23rd. That could be a potential day where we see Pope Francis step down in some way or depart in some sort of way, because that's the day that Saturn is going to go direct in the 8th house. And we're gonna unpack that a little bit, because he's in Sati Sati at the moment too. But October 23rd could be an important date, but really anytime even before or after that, all the way till January 17th, with the Saturn changing signs into Aquarius, we could see some sort of stepping down or some sort of situation like that. So let's go back to the chart here, guys. Pope Francis, he's a Gemini ascendant. And you notice right in the first thing we notice is he's got Ketu in the first house. And Ketu, it can make somebody tremendously spiritual. The downside about Ketu being in the first house is there is this idea of like having weak psychic boundaries. So when I have clients that have Ketu in the first house, I tell them it's important to shield on a daily basis, because you're just picking up all of the energy that's out there. And, the energies that are out in this world are the good and the bad and the ugly, just like that Clint Eastwood movie. So it's important to shield if any of you have Ketu in the first house. But this shows there's this idea towards the opposite axis is Rahu's in the 7th house. So usually there's this idea of the life is focused on partners, are focused on others. So in a charitable capacity, this would be excellent, right? Like if you're a religious leader, it's like, wow, that's great because you're focused on others. Traditionally, when this is going on in a chart, it shows somebody having a lot of karma around marriage. So someone's going to be really, you know, really focused on marriage, and they might even have many marriage partners as a result of Rahu being in the 7th house. Okay. Now you might be asking, well, how can, how could the chart be focused on marriage when he's a pope, or, he's a he was a priest before that, a cardinal and a priest, and he took all these vows of celibacy. Well, remember, at its root, the 7th house is vows. Okay. So when somebody joins a religious order or a monastery, the 7th house can represent a marriage to a type of marriage, or making a vow to a religious organization or a religious deity. So for example, I think it's the nuns that they say they're married to Christ or something along those lines. I'm not sure with the priests, but there's a similar idea of they're married to the church, or they're married to that. So that's where you get, because Rahu in the 7th is mostly about vows. So keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to bring up was the rising nakshatra, and we're going to talk about that in the slide. The rising nakshatra is Ardra, which I find kind of interesting because I don't typically feel that that's like usually the nakshatra of a spiritual leader. So that's a little bit unusual from my point of view. I usually feel that it's something else like Pushya or Maga or something along those lines. But, there's a lot of wiggle room within charts. So the rising nakshatra Ardra, this is the Shakti. Remember, all of the nakshatras have a special power associated with them. So the Shakti is the ability to make gains through effort. And I find it interesting because it's a very fierce nakshatra. Ardra people tend to be, this is why it's interesting. People that are Ardra people typically are people that are, it's like they're very connected to the earth. They're very connected to a wildness of being a human. So if you think of like the human being as our primitive nature, that's what Ardra represents. It's that animal nature that humans can have, in terms of like reproduction, in terms of being connected to the land, to the other animals, to the other life, shelter, hoarding. That's all like Ardra. So Ardra is really about putting your fingers in the earth. So I find that very interesting that Pope Francis is very connected to earth. And I don't know if he's an environmentalist, but it's possible because Ardra is so connected to the earth. So let's go back to the slide here. We talked about Rahu in the 7th house indicates marriage to a religious order or a deity. So even in other religions, they might make vows to be in connection to their Ishta Devata, whatever that is. And let's talk about the moon in the 8th house, because a lot of people kind of wonder, what's going on with the Vatican, because people think of like Vatican vaults. We tend to think of like all these secrets that they know. Maybe they know about the extraterrestrial presence on the planet, or maybe they know other things. So let's take a look at that. We're going to go back to the chart here. And, it's interesting when we look at this is you'll see the moon is in the 8th house. And this can create a certain volatility. Obviously, with the mother, it can create some volatility. And also, if we're looking at Pope Francis' mother, he's got Mars in the 4th as well. So there was a volatile nature with the mother. But there's this idea of when moon is in the 8th house, there's this comfortability with secrets. Like somebody with moon in the 8th house would be comfortable being in a secretive group, or comfortable knowing occult information, things like that. So this idea of this underground information in the Vatican archives, yes, he's very much aware of whatever information is down there. He's definitely aware of all those things. So I want you guys to be aware of that. Let me clean up the chart for a second. Also, there's this idea of this is what made him Pope in the chart. If you guys look at Saturn, where natal Saturn is in Pope Francis's chart, this is basically what I feel made Pope Francis the Pope, this karma right here. Because you notice that Saturn's in the 9th house, and it's in its own sign, so it's really strong. So Saturn's doing really good in its own house of Aquarius, and it's in the 9th house. So this is the idea of, you know, the ninth house is a patriarch. The ninth house is a priest. At its most extreme level, it's a pope. Or the godfather would be the ninth house. So there's good patriarchs and there's bad patriarchs, okay? So there's this idea of being in charge of this religion, but I want to make a clear distinction. Saturn being in the ninth house is all about institutional religion. So it's not like the yogi who is tremendously spiritually advanced and going off into a cave somewhere and meditating. There can be tremendously spiritual people, yogis and yoginis out there, that they're very unknown by society and they're just doing their own thing, doing their own spirituality, and they barely are in the limelight, if noticed at all. So when Saturn's there, this is all about public institutions, the actual buildings, the concrete things that make a religion. So think about cathedrals, think about the public rituals, think about the garments, the robes they wear. That's all a public physical manifestation of a spiritual teaching. So that's what Saturn's doing. Saturn's actually giving it this physical substance. Okay, so, and a sense of responsibility. So there's a sense of heavy responsibility with Saturn being in the ninth house. It might not be enjoyable for him, actually. So this is this idea of just heavy responsibility, and it feels like a burden, and he's Pope, but, you know, it's all about ritual. It's all about having the establishment, having this established religion, because we need it to continue on. So that's the idea. And I feel like probably a main part of what he's doing is trying to preserve all those traditions within the Catholic Church. Let me clean this up. We're going to go back to the chart. Now we're going to talk about predictions after I just make sure. By the way, the moon in the 8th house can give some psychic ability, and Ketu in the 1st house. So that's something to bring up. Is he intuitive? Is he empathic? Absolutely. Very intuitive, very empathic. Let's go back. Okay, guys, this is the Mahadasha he's in. This is the Mahadasha. Like, if you're gonna like, Ketu Mahadasha is one of those Mahadashas, and he's in it if we take a look from October 2016 to October 14th, 2023. It's 7 years. It's one of the worst Mahadashas. Like, when I go to Vedic astrology forums, this is the Mahadasha that people say their life was basically destroyed. Okay. Ketu is notorious. If you guys are going through a long enough bhukti, if you're going through a very short bhukti, usually it's very minor. But if you're going through a long enough period, several years of a Ketu period, say for example, if you're at the end of Venus Mahadasha, Ketu bhukti is 2 or 3 years, or Ketu Mahadasha 7 years, there's always this idea of sense of loss with Ketu. There's always like something like either you're resigning from something, you're stepping down. There's this idea of surrender. There's this idea of divorce, like if you're married. There's this idea of retirement and being very lonely. Ketu is a time of pilgrimage. Ketu is a time of like not advancing in a social material way. So when people think of advancement, like with career, money, status, marriage, all those social material markers, Ketu's usually 90% of the time, there are always exceptions. 90% of the time, Ketu is going to be something that's taking away those social material status markers. So that's where I'm like, right when I saw that Pope Francis is in Ketu, it's like, okay, here we go. So I don't know if you guys can see this in the, it might be small on your screen, but he entered the Ketu again. Ketu was in 2017, and he's currently in Ketu Saturn. He's about to enter Ketu Mercury, which is the last bhukti on October 17th, 2022. But the main thing and the main focus to me is Ketu, okay? So he's going to be in Ketu till 2000, and let me get the numbers for you again. And he's in a really difficult time right now because he's also in Sati Sati. So this is really interesting when we study the chart. So October 14th, 2023. So about a year more. So it's very likely he's going to resign and step down over the next year, possibly in the next few months. Okay. I'm giving you the date of October 23rd because that's when Saturn goes direct in the sign of Capricorn. We'll talk about that. But K2 is associated with loss, separation, wandering, confusion, resignation, letting go. Tremendously spiritual time, though. Not very good for material results. And it's in the first house. So let's take a look at that. This is the thing that I feel is the issue, is especially in Pope Francis' chart, Ketu is in the first house. And the first house represents your body, your identity, your status. So I would be actually quite worried about health problems right now. And we have transiting Rahu. Remember, transiting Rahu's in the sign of Aries till October of 2023. Well, look at it in the Navamsha chart. And remember, the Navamsha chart gets stronger the older you get. When you're in your 50s, when you're in your 60s, and you're getting older, the Navamsha chart becomes even more powerful. In some ways, a lot of the energy goes into the Navamsha chart. So in the Navamsha chart, there's this Rahu return, and Rahu's going over his sun in the Navamsha chart. That could be detrimental for health. So there could definitely be this health issues and problems with that could definitely escalate. And we could see a sudden departure. We could see it very sudden as well. And the reason why, transiting Saturn. So remember, transiting Saturn's in Capricorn. It's going to be there till January 17th of 2023. Okay, and it's going retrograde right now. But remember, October 23rd is the date I gave you, because that's when Saturn's actually going to go direct. It's actually going to change directions. Okay, and look at where Saturn is. It's in his 8th house. This could be sudden departures, sudden endings, explosive type of events that are happening. And he's in K2. Remember that, he's in K2. So it's like all this energy of leaving, of departing, and this departure could be very sudden. So I'm expecting by the end of the year, I feel like there's going to be either a stepping down or some sort of crisis that may cause, him to step down or depart in some sort of fashion. Let me show you guys the Saturn or the Sati Sati. So let's go back to that because I do want you guys, he's in emotionally, this is a really heavy time. So Sati Sati, transit Saturn is going over the natal moon. Now remember, Sati Sati typically lasts, if we go back to the chart, it typically lasts 7.5 years. So Sati Sati in India, it's usually a time of bad luck. It's when transiting Saturn is in the sign before your moon, then it's going over your natal moon, then it's the sign after your natal moon. So because Saturn transits each sign for 2.3 years, it ends up being about 7.5 years, the whole Sati Sati. Well, Sati Sati is at its very worst when it's actually in the sign that your moon is in. A lot of times people that are in Sati Sati, when it's right over your moon, they face issues like depression. They have people turn their backs on them. They have sudden changes where they feel like they're isolated or they're separated. And keep in mind, he's in Ketu Mahadasha on top of this. Okay, so this is a really interesting time, and we'll have to see what happens. So look, Saturn's going right over the natal moon. So anytime people are going through that, and I've had a lot of clients having this right now. A lot of people have their moon in Capricorn, apparently. And this is just, when Saturn's going over your moon, it is just like that. It's usually a time where you're really unhappy. So this is very unhappy. So if he makes a sudden departure, there's not anything happy about it. Maybe he's being forced to in some way. And that's why it's not a happy occasion. Okay. There's a very Saturn and K2 feel about this. A lot of cruel planets are active at this point. Also, I did want to point out to you guys that Saturn is transiting 12 houses from his natal Saturn over the next 5 months. And remember, 12th house, again, we got confluence there. So if we count 12 houses from his natal Saturn, that's going to be the 8th house here. So this idea of resigning, resignation, walking away, endings. That's all part of this time right now. So very likely we're going to see a change in the Pope in the very near future. October 23rd, like I said, pay attention to that date. Also, there's going to be some eclipses. We're going to talk more specifically about that in some other videos. There's some eclipses in the month of October as well. So that shows we're going through some massive sea change of events right now. Well, thank you guys for being here. Let me take a look and see if there's any questions in the chat. All right, and Devika's here, Chris is here, Carrie Lightyear's here. Thank you everyone for being here. And Devika says Pope Francis has spoken about Gaia and Mother Earth. Well, I'm sure with the chart I'm seeing, especially with Mars in the 4th house, there is this idea of like fighting for the earth or trying to protect the earth in some sort of way. So I do feel like that could create this idea of environmental stewardship with Pope Francis. But we're likely to see a change very soon. We're going through a lot of changes right now. So now we got a King Charles. Now there's the potential for a new Pope in the near future. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think that, what do you guys think is going to happen? Comment down below. I'm definitely looking forward to reading some of your comments. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for your support. And I will be seeing you guys in my next video very soon. So take care.